I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding. I found out while holding a paper plate of coleslaw at a family barbecue in upstate New York. Weeks later, the FBI walked into her ceremony mid-vows and arrested her fiancé. The video went viral. 39 missed calls lit up my phone. But I was already gone, living in a cabin by a frozen lake with receipts and a name they never saw coming. I'm Caroline. And this is how I disappeared quietly right before everything fell apart. It happened at my aunt's backyard cookout in Albany, New York on a Saturday so hot the lemonade sweated in its own jug. The air smelled like charcoal and sunscreen and the faint bitterness of overcooked meat. Kids screamed near the bounce house, and someone's portable speaker crackled through a country playlist from the early 2000s. I was balancing a flimsy paper plate of macaroni salad in one hand, trying to scoop a corner of potato salad with a bending plastic fork when my cousin Lindsay wandered over from the grill. She looked effortless as always. Her tan shoulders freckled under the sun, hair pulled into a messy ponytail that somehow still looked like a magazine shoot. She waved her hot dog at me and smiled. "So, are you flying in for Felicity's big day or just driving up?" That was it. That was the moment. One sentence tossed out with the same weight as asking what kind of pie I liked. I blinked. "Big day," she gave a little laugh, the kind people use when they think you're being dry on purpose. "The wedding, silly. She's finally marrying that guy with the investment firm, Evan. The one with the hair like a television preacher." My mouth opened just slightly and I closed it again. "Oh, right. Of course," I forced a smile. Then I mumbled something about needing to check on the deviled eggs, handed my plate to someone passing by, and walked off toward the driveway. No one noticed. Not my aunt, who was fanning herself with a paper plate while telling Uncle Rick about her new kitchen backsplash. Not my mother, who was arranging a tray of hamburger buns on a picnic table like she was laying out communion. No one saw me disappear. Inside the car, the heat pressed against my chest like a weight. I turned the engine on, blasting the air conditioning, and let my head fall back against the seat. Felicity. My sister. She's 5 years younger, but there were long stretches where I felt more like her mother than her sibling. When Dad's heart condition forced him to retire, Mom took a second job at the public library, and I took over. I packed her lunches, drove her to and from soccer practice, read her college essays, and sat through more than one meeting with her high school guidance counselor when Mom was too busy. When she got her first apartment, I helped her move in, built her IKEA furniture, and stocked her freezer with homemade meals. When she called crying from Philadelphia in the middle of her internship, convinced she couldn't make it through medical rotations, I stayed on the phone for 3 hours just breathing with her. When she met Evan, I was the one who did a background check. Not because I didn't trust her, because I wanted to protect her. And now she was getting married. There was a venue, a cake, a guest list, a date. And no one had told me. I stared out the windshield, eyes unfocused, the outline of the kitchen window framed between the hedges. Through the glass, I could see Mom in her pale blue dress, the one she wore to anything sentimental: baby showers, bridal, teas, funerals. Her hair was pinned back in soft curls, lipstick fresh. She looked serene. She didn't look like someone carrying a secret. But that's the thing about my mother. Her silence is always beautifully wrapped. When I was 13 and failed my first algebra exam, she folded the paper in half and told me it wasn't the end of the world, then didn't speak to me for 2 days. When I cried at Dad's retirement party, overwhelmed by the change, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't make this about you, honey." That was her way. Efficient. Kind, but with a blade tucked behind the smile. My hands were damp on the steering wheel. My calendar for the next month was empty. No save the date, no group texts, no whispered mentions from other relatives about dress fittings or flower choices. This wasn't an oversight. This was a decision. And what stunned me wasn't Felicity's silence. We'd grown distant in recent years, her job, my hours, different cities. I'd expected to be kept in the loop loosely, maybe find out via a late phone call or a last-minute invitation. But Mom had always said family is a circle. Unbroken. Bound by truth. I guess some truths were too inconvenient. The air was cold in the car, now raising goosebumps along my arms. I glanced at my phone. A single text from a coworker asking about Monday's budget report. Nothing else. I didn't know if I felt angry or just hollow. Like I had stepped into a version of my life where I'd never existed. Eventually, I opened the door and stepped back out. The sun hit like a slap. I walked along the side of the yard, avoiding the patio, pretending to check on the kids in the bounce house. A few of them were crying. One had fallen and scraped a knee. No one seemed to care much. I paused behind the garage where the hedge opened up enough to see the patio again. Mom was there pouring lemonade, laughing at something Aunt May said. Her laugh drifted across the lawn, light and crisp. I'd heard that laugh when Felicity brought home a C- and Mom called it creative grading. I'd heard it when my first boyfriend broke up with me and Mom said better now than after a mortgage right. It was a laugh that smoothed over everything, that told the world we were fine no matter what broke underneath. And in that moment, watching her toast the future of a family I apparently wasn't part of, something in me went still. Not broken, not bitter, just still. I didn't go back to the table. I didn't ask questions. I walked to my car again, turned the engine on, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like someone who had finally understood that absence isn't always an accident. Sometimes it's an arrangement. And this time I wasn't going to beg to be included. I waited 2 days before I called my mother. Not because I needed time to cool off. I wasn't angry in the traditional way. There was no boiling point, no urge to scream or throw something. What I felt was quieter than that. Heavier. Like someone had packed my chest with wet sand. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hi, honey," she said in that chipper tone she used with store clerks and church volunteers. I could picture her in the kitchen wiping down the counter with a damp rag, the phone tucked between her cheek and shoulder. "Everything all right?" I kept my voice steady. "I just have a quick question. Is Felicity getting married?" There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to tell me she was choosing her words. "Well, yes, next month actually. We weren't sure if you'd be free." I stared out the window at the maple tree in my yard, the leaves still full and green. I wasn't aware anything was happening. She chuckled, light and dismissive. "Oh, Caroline, don't be dramatic." There it was. That word. The same one she used when I cried at Dad's retirement dinner and she told me to collect myself. The same word that followed me when I quit my job and she said I was overreacting. The same word she whispered when I told her I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. "Don't catastrophize, sweetheart. It's just a small gathering." Felicity didn't want anything big. Just family. "I am family." "Yes, of course you are," she said quickly, then softer. "But you're always so busy. These things get complicated." Evan's parents had a lot of opinions and there were only so many seats at the table. "You understand." I didn't. But I knew better than to say that. "You're not mad, are you?" I looked at the photo on my fridge of Felicity and me from 10 years ago, arms linked at the beach, both of us sunburned and laughing. "I'm not sure what I am. We just thought this would be easier. Less pressure on everyone." That word again. Easier. Not better, not fair. Just easier. Which meant it had nothing to do with what was right. It was about what was convenient. I told her I had to get back to work, though I wasn't working that day. She said, "All right, sweetheart," then hung up like we had just discussed groceries. I stood in my kitchen a while after that, staring at the blank notepad on the counter where I usually scribbled reminders. My chest felt like static. I walked to my laptop and opened the financial dashboard I hadn't looked at in months. The trust account Dad had set up when he stepped down from his company was still active. After the heart surgery and the early retirement, he wanted each of us to have something that couldn't be touched by bad luck or bad decisions. "Carolyn will manage it," he had said. "She's the responsible one. Let her oversee the disbursements." I was 30 at the time and didn't even know how to say no to him. I took the role and treated it like sacred duty. Whenever either of us needed help, a student loan payment for Felicity Mom's car repair, I handled the paperwork, filed the tax records, kept the books clean. Now, looking at the account balance, something didn't sit right. There was a withdrawal last week. A large one. $97,000. It was labeled for event coordination and hospitality deposits. My hand hovered over the mouse. No request had come through me. No dual authorization, no one even asked, it had just moved. Like someone believed they had the right. I clicked deeper into the transaction. The digital signature on the release form was my own. Except it wasn't. I hadn't touched this file since February. I felt the chill settle into my skin. Not the kind that made you shiver. The kind that made everything inside you go still. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Julia's name. She was my college roommate turned financial fraud attorney. The kind of woman who kept 3 passwords for every account and read privacy policies for fun. We hadn't spoken in a few months, but I knew she would pick up. She always did. "Caroline, you okay?" "Not really. I need to ask you something." Off the record. I read her the transaction line and the authorization code. There was a pause on the line. "Did you sign off on it?" "Number, I haven't logged into that account in weeks." She asked me to send her the files, PDF screenshots, everything. I did, fingers trembling more from adrenaline than fear. "Caroline," she said after a minute. "That's not your signature." "I know. Do you want me to run this through the system, quietly?" "Yes. Please." I hung up and sat back in the chair, letting the weight of it settle. They hadn't just left me out of a wedding. They had used my name. My trust. My role. I wasn't just excluded. I had been erased and impersonated. Outside, the sun was still bright, lawn mowers buzzed in the distance. My neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. The world didn't look any different. But something inside me had shifted. And this time I wasn't going to pretend it hadn't. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and stood staring out the window as it started to boil. Steam curled up past the glass, but I didn't really see it. My eyes followed the lines of the trees outside, the early autumn leaves beginning to change. Everything looked the same, but something in me had tipped. I poured the water, stirred a spoonful of honey into a chipped mug, and took it to the couch. My laptop waited on the coffee table, screen still open to the trust account. The transaction sat there like a bruise I couldn't unsee. I closed the tab and opened another. Iceland. It was almost automatic. I didn't think it through, not in the way I usually do. No list. No budget spreadsheet. No over-researching accommodations. I had bookmarked a cabin on a travel blog years ago, one of those dream it and forget it links. Somehow I still remembered the name. It took me less than 10 minutes to book the ticket. Round trip. Boston to Reykjavik. Departing in 3 days. I filled out the PTO request online, kept the note vague. Personal reasons. No one from HR reached out. I had 2.5 weeks saved up, and I'd never used more than 3 days in a row. I didn't tell my team. I didn't owe them that. Then I started packing. I didn't overthink it. Just the essentials. A waterproof coat, wool socks, fleece leggings, thermal shirts. My old Nikon film camera, which I hadn't touched since college but kept out of sentiment. A blank journal. A paperback I probably wouldn't read. I texted no one. I left a single sticky note on my fridge. Gone. Don't wait up. The morning of my flight, I took a long shower, pulled my hair into a low bun, and put on the scarf Dad bought me in Vermont the winter before he passed. I slid my suitcase into the trunk of my car and drove to Logan Airport under an early gray sky. Security was uneventful. The flight gate was half full. I watched couples share chargers and parents wrangle toddlers with crushed snacks. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow in a clean way. Like something had been scooped out and replaced with air. I boarded. Window seat, back of the plane. No small talk. No drink. Just me and the quiet hum of the engine as the city dropped away beneath us. The flight path curved gently north over Canada, over Greenland. I stared at the glowing map on the seatback screen, watching the arc stretch closer to Reykjavik. It looked like a stitch across the top of the world. When we landed, it was early morning. The sky looked washed out, as if someone had wrung all the color from it. The air smelled faintly of sulfur and snow. I picked up the keys to the rental car from a sleepy clerk in a glass booth, then drove for hours through quiet hills and black volcanic rock. The roads narrowed and curved until I reached a dirt path marked only by a wooden stake with a number carved into it. The cabin was exactly as I remembered from the photo. Small cedar paneled a single story tucked into the slope above a glacier-fed lake. The roof was moss-covered. A small deck overlooked the water. Inside was spare but warm. A wood-burning stove, a small kitchenette, a narrow bed made up with wool blankets. Everything smelled like pine and ash. There was no television. No clock on the wall. No sound except the wind curling around the edges of the windows. I took off my shoes, unpacked slowly, and set the kettle on the stove. Then I sat at the tiny table by the window, pulled out my journal, and wrote the first words I had written in weeks. I didn't write a narrative. No reflections, no analysis. Just a list. Things I didn't have to do here. Explain myself. RSVP. Buy a dress. Apologize. Be the responsible one. The list went on for pages. I fell asleep that night without setting an alarm. The next morning I woke to the sound of snow shifting across the roof. Light poured in from the east-facing windows. I made oatmeal, sat cross-legged on the floor, and ate slowly while watching the lake outside shift under the wind. Patches of ice floated across the surface like puzzle pieces. Later that afternoon, I pulled on my coat and walked down to the edge of the water. The sky was pale lavender, the kind of cold light that made everything feel slow. I stood still for a long time, hands deep in my pockets. Then I took out my phone. I opened the camera and lifted it without thinking. No smile, no angle. Just the lake, the horizon, the curve of my sleeve in the corner. I tapped share, no caption, no location. Just posted it to my story. Then I waited. 10 minutes passed. I checked the view count. My mother, my sister, 2 of my cousins. One of Felicity's friends from med school. None of them messaged. They didn't have to, they saw it. And that was enough. It wasn't about revenge or guilt, it was about presence, proof of life. Not at the bridal shower. Not at the bachelorette weekend. Not in the photos they would soon post in matching pastel robes. But here. On the edge of a lake that didn't know my name. Watching. Still here. I closed the app and set my phone face down on the windowsill. Outside, the lake shifted slightly in the wind, thin sheets of ice drifting like lazy boats without direction. The clouds hung low and colorless, brushing the edge of the water like smoke. I wrapped the wool blanket tighter around my shoulders and sat back at the small table. The quiet was clean here. No street sounds, no notifications, no questions. Just the creak of the wooden walls adjusting to the cold and the occasional whisper of pine trees leaning into each other. But silence doesn't always mean stillness. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and stared at the login page for the trust account. I hesitated before typing in the password. It wasn't the numbers that scared me. It was the story behind them. Back in 2016, when my father stepped away from his company after a second mild heart attack, he'd called me into the study. His desk had always been cluttered with yellow legal pads and manila folders. That day, there was only one file sitting in the center. "I want you to manage it," he'd said. "The trust. I've split it evenly between you and Felicity. You'll have oversight authority. She's younger. Still figuring things out. You've always been the steady one." At the time, I was working in internal compliance for a mid-size accounting firm outside of Worcester. I knew what trusts were. I knew the rules. I told him I didn't need the responsibility, but he insisted. "You're not just my daughter. You're the one who never flinches." So I signed the papers. Oversight included dual authorization on major withdrawals, a structure we all agreed on. If someone needed anything over $25,000, both beneficiaries had to sign off. It wasn't just money, it was meant to protect us. I typed in the password and hit enter. The account dashboard loaded slowly, the bar spinning longer than usual. When the numbers finally appeared, I scanned them line by line. The withdrawal hadn't vanished. It was still there. $97,000 labeled as event expenses and marked as completed 10 days prior. I clicked into the PDF of the authorization. The form looked right. The layout, the wording, even the signature. But it wasn't mine. The signature was smooth, confident, just the way mine looked on tax returns and lease agreements. But this one was too smooth. Like it had been cut and pasted. No pen pressure. No hesitation on the loop in my last name, which I always hesitated on slightly. I took a screenshot. Then another of the metadata tab. Then one more of the transaction log where a note had been entered. Signed digitally by Caroline Albright, the 3rd of October 2024 2:41 p.m. Est. Except I had been in a meeting at that time. A Zoom call with 3 analysts and one very tired client. I opened my email and began typing. Subject: need your eyes on something. I sent the screenshots to Julia, attaching a brief note. Can you take a quick look? I didn't sign this. Julia replied in under 5 minutes. Want me to call? I typed back. Yes. The screen lit up before I could even set my phone down. Hey, she said, her voice sharp with focus. Where are you right now? I'm in Iceland. A beat of silence. Okay, are you safe? Yes, cabin in the hills. I'm fine. Just not sure this document is. I walked her through what I'd seen. She asked to share my screen and I did. She didn't talk much as she looked. Occasionally she hummed under her breath or made a note. That's not your signature, she said finally. It looks like a vector overlay. What does that mean? It means someone probably took a high-res image of your signature and used software to drop it onto the document. Clean placement, exact dimensions. It would fool most automated systems, but not a trained eye. I felt my stomach tighten. Julia kept going. Also, this system is supposed to generate a dual authentication request to your phone. You would have gotten a text code before any withdrawal over 50,000. Did you get one number? Nothing. I haven't gotten any login alerts either. She swore softly. That's a breach. Could it be someone inside the bank? Unlikely. More likely, someone used your old credentials or bypassed them using administrative override. But that's not your average hacker move. That takes access and motive. I sat back in my chair watching the lake through the fogged window. What are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking this withdrawal wasn't just for flowers and catering. Event expenses is vague on purpose. It gives enough cover for whatever someone wants to slip through. And you think they used the trust to pay for the wedding? She didn't answer for a long moment. I think someone used your name to access money you were legally assigned to protect, and that has consequences. The word consequences landed hard. Not just morally, legally. My hands went cold. What do I do now? I'll look into the filing logs, she said. Quietly. I won't trigger anything official yet, but you need to start backing up everything. Email records, texts, anything with dates and details. You need a paper trail. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I'll send a checklist in an hour, she added. And Caroline. Stay off group texts for now. If someone asks where you are, say you're off grid. Don't react. Don't accuse. I won't. We hung up. I sat there for a while listening to the wind slip along the walls to the sound of the stove cooling behind me. Then I stood, went to my suitcase, and pulled out the file folder I always traveled with. Birth certificate, passport, legal docs, trust papers. I spread them out on the table like a quiet defense line. My father had asked me to be the steady one, so I would be. But not for them. For the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional pop of wood settling in the beams and the low hum of wind brushing against the windows. I lay under the wool blanket staring at the ceiling, going over every transaction I could remember in the trust, every time I'd sent Felicity a wire for something small, every phone call with Mom that ended in a soft thank you and silence. And then there was Evan. I didn't trust him the first time I met him. It was a summer barbecue at my parents' house in 2021. He showed up late wearing a blazer in 90-degree heat, sunglasses perched on his head, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He kept referring to Felicity as his angel and answered questions with vague charm and lots of hand gestures. When I asked what he did, he said he was in wealth strategy. When I pressed, he told me he'd been with a firm in Manhattan for a while but had transitioned to private consulting after what he called a realignment of priorities. It sounded like nonsense then. It sounds worse now. The firm he mentioned was Blackbrook Capital. I remembered the name because it had been one of the firms involved in a client fraud case a few years back. I hadn't thought much of it until now. The next morning, I messaged Julia again. "Can I ask you one more thing?" Her reply came instantly, "Always." I called her sitting on the back steps of the cabin with a mug of black coffee warming my hands. "Do you know anyone who used to work at Blackbrook Capital?" She paused. "Maybe. Depends why." "You remember Evan St. James, Felicity's fiancé, vaguely. You said he had weird vibes." Weird vibes and possibly a record. I told her about what he said about the sudden consulting gig, about the name of the firm. "Let me check something." She hung up and called back 20 minutes later. "I just talked to a friend who left Blackbrook in 2020. She remembers Evan. He was asked to resign." "Why?" "Because he moved a client's retirement assets into a high-risk derivative account without consent. Client lost almost 300 grand. Blackbrook paid a settlement to avoid formal investigation. Internal HR flagged it. Was it reported number? They covered it. Said it would damage firm reputation. So he just walked away. Clean slate," Julia said. "Until now." I felt the chill in my hands creep up into my chest. "He's marrying my sister," I said quietly. "And now there's money missing from the trust account under a transaction labeled event expenses. Do you think he manipulated her? I don't know. But even if he didn't, he's involved now." Julia exhaled. "You're not crazy, Caroline. This looks like textbook laundering. Pull a large amount from a family-controlled asset, funnel it through event vendors or shell invoices, wash it through legitimate-looking expenses. And then it's clean." "Exactly." I didn't ask how she knew all this. Julia had worked enough whistleblower cases to recognize the signs. "Do I tell my mom?" I asked. "Do you think she'll believe you?" I didn't answer. "She'll defend Felicity. She'll say I'm overreacting." Again. "Caroline, you have evidence. You don't need permission." I hung up and stared at the fog rolling over the lake, soft and heavy like a curtain being drawn over the world. I opened my laptop and found the Treasury Department's anonymous reporting portal. I had never used it before, but Julia had sent me the link in our last case together. I gathered everything. Screenshots, financial logs, metadata. I included the PDF of the forged signature. The list of vendors paid from the trust. The wedding venue's payment confirmation. I typed carefully, keeping it factual. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Relationship to the trust. Evan's employment history. His quiet exit from Blackbrook. It took me 2 hours. At the bottom, I wrote one last line. Primary contact not disclosed for safety reasons. Then I clicked submit. The screen blinked. Then cleared. I sat back in the chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel clever. I felt like someone who had just pushed a boulder off a cliff and now had to wait for the sound of impact. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Thinking of you today. Hope you're taking care of yourself." No mention of Felicity. No mention of the wedding. No questions. Just a soft, generic sentiment wrapped in silence. I didn't respond. I turned off the phone and walked outside, letting the cold hit my face raw. The sky above the lake was bone-white, empty, and endless. I watched a raven glide across the edge of the pines, and I thought maybe the silence wasn't empty after all. Maybe it was a waiting room. The wedding date was never announced publicly. There were no mailed invitations, no registry, no official posts. But families like mine never really keep secrets. They just speak in code. On Friday morning, I saw it in a boomerang. Champagne flutes clinking. A table set with pale pink linens and name cards. A caption underneath that said "Love is in the air" with a soft pink heart. The person who posted it was my cousin Trish, someone who never passed up a moment to curate her life like a highlight reel. The location tag was a boutique in 2 hours outside Albany. That was enough. By mid-morning, there were more hints. A close-up of manicured hands holding a bouquet. A blurry shot of a white dress laid out on a bed. A flat lay of earrings, shoes, a delicate perfume bottle. The digital breadcrumbs were there if you knew what to look for. Felicity's friends weren't subtle. I closed the app. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much at all. Just a kind of dull resignation. It's strange the moment you realize your own family has chosen to write you out of their story. Not with malice, but with a kind of effortless revision. As if my absence made things easier. Cleaner. By late afternoon, the wind outside had picked up. The lake was restless water churning under shifting clouds. I made tea and wrapped myself in my thickest sweater. I hadn't touched my phone again until it buzzed against the windowsill, rattling gently like something alive. It was from Julia. No message. Just a link. The preview was a video. TikTok. The thumbnail showed a reception hall and a blur of people. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to press play, but I did. The video started in chaos, screaming. Not joyful, but guttural sharp. A woman's voice cracking as she shouted over music. You were sleeping with him. During the whole engagement, the camera jerked wildly. Someone had been filming from the far side of the room behind a centerpiece of roses and votives. In the center of the chaos stood Rachel. She was Felicity's maid of honor. They'd been best friends since college. Rachel was wearing a sage green satin dress and shaking mascara streaking down her cheeks. You were my best friend, Rachel yelled. I stood next to you through everything. And you were with him. With Evan, a gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone's drink clattered to the floor. Chairs scraped. Felicity was frozen. In the frame, I could see her standing by the sweetheart table, veil slightly askew, bouquet dropped at her feet. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not young. Just undone. Evan tried to reach for Rachel. She jerked away. Don't touch me, she screamed. You liar. You used me. Another person stepped into frame trying to calm her, but Rachel pushed past and stormed toward the exit. Someone in the background said, "Oh my God. That's the maid of honor." The video cut out. I sat there blinking. And then my phone buzzed again. Another video. Different angle. This one started moments later. The music had stopped. People were standing awkwardly murmuring. Some were holding plates, others just looked dazed. Then the door opened. Two men in suits stepped inside. The camera zoomed in shakily. FBI. One of them pulled out a folded piece of paper, raised his voice over the murmurs. Evan St. James, we have a federal warrant for your arrest on suspicion of financial fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The room froze. Felicity gasped. Someone screamed. Evan backed up, hands half raised, mumbling something no one could hear. Another phone recorded from the left, catching the moment an agent took his arm. He didn't resist, but his face looked like a man whose entire world had just collapsed in on itself. The room erupted. Some guests ran out. One woman clutched her handbag like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. A child cried. Someone knocked over a centerpiece. The cake table swayed dangerously. Felicity sank into a chair, hand over her mouth. And then the video ended. I let the silence in the cabin stretch. Outside, the wind had stopped. The lake was still. I watched the screen go black and set my phone down slowly. I hadn't told anyone where I was. I hadn't said a word to my family in days. But they knew. They all knew now. And this time I wasn't the one who disappeared. I was just finishing a cup of tea when the first call came in. The phone buzzed softly on the windowsill, lighting up the dim cabin with an unfamiliar number. I ignored it. Then came another. This one was from Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Within 10 minutes I had 6 missed calls. Then 13. By the time I looked again, the counter had jumped to 23. I turned off Do Not Disturb and opened the call log. It read like a roll call of people who had either abandoned me or never expected to need me again. My mother, Felicity. Aunt May. Rachel, the maid of honor. 2 former coworkers I hadn't spoken to since I left my job in Boston. My high school piano teacher. A number I vaguely recognized from a local news station. My voicemail icon blinked. I hesitated, then tapped play. The first message was from my cousin Trish, the one who had posted the boomerang. Oh my God, Caroline, I had no idea. Is it true? Are you the one who? I don't know what to say. Just, Call me when you can. She sounded breathless, like she had run across a parking lot to record it. The next was from my mother. Caroline, sweetheart. It's Mom. I don't even know where to begin. Things got very bad very quickly. Felicity is beside herself. I didn't know everything was. I didn't know. Did you know? Her voice caught. I wish you were here. We could, I don't know. Talk. Please call me when you get this. Please. She didn't say sorry. Not for the wedding. Not for the money. Not for the silence. Just please call me. Then Felicity's voice cracked and unsteady. Caroline, I know you hate me. I get it, I do. But I swear I didn't know about the money. Or Rachel, or what Evan was involved in. I thought I was building something real. Everyone's talking about it now. I feel like I'm drowning. Please. She didn't finish the sentence. By 4:30 a.m. Iceland time, I had 39 missed calls. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. I sat at the window and watched as dawn began to break over the lake. Mist clung to the water in thin strands, and the trees beyond stood still frozen in the pale gray light. A new message popped up. This one was a text from someone I hadn't spoken to since graduate school. Saw the video. Holy hell. Proud of you, afraid of you, not sure which. Then another message. This time from a number I didn't know. Miss Albright, this is Lauren Marks from the Daily Ledger. If you're willing to speak off the record about the trust documents or the allegations made during the investigation, please text back or call. Delete. The next voicemail was from Rachel. Her voice shook with fury and regret. I'm sorry I made a scene, but I couldn't pretend anymore. I thought someone had to say it out loud. I didn't know it would explode like this. I didn't know you were watching. But I'm glad you were. Julia sent a message next. Just one line. They're going to try to spin this. Hold your ground. I powered off the phone. Not because I was afraid. Not because I didn't want to hear more. But because in that moment I realized I didn't owe anyone a response. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They weren't calling to see if I was okay. They were calling because the structure had collapsed, and the person they had always leaned on wasn't there to hold it up this time. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me that handled things. That swept up the mess. That answered texts at midnight. That rewired tax forms and soothed wounded pride. That edited apology emails for Mom. That sat in the front row at graduations and stood in the shadows at birthday parties and made everything work so no one else had to notice how fragile it all was. That version was gone. All that was left was me, sitting by a lake thousands of miles from the wreckage. Quiet. Watching. The sun was creeping higher now, stretching pale light across the wood floor of the cabin. I made oatmeal, added a pinch of salt, and ate slowly by the window. Outside, the world looked unchanged. But I knew better. Somewhere in upstate New York, a venue was probably still strewn with abandoned centerpieces and deflated expectations. They would clean it up. They always did. But this time not with my help. I wrapped myself in a thick shawl and stepped out onto the deck. The cold bit at my skin sharp and bracing. I liked it. It reminded me I was real, still here, still whole. Behind me the phone stayed dark. I breathed deep, in, out, and let the silence stretch long enough that it finally started to feel like peace. Snow had started to fall again by late morning light, and slow, the kind that drifted sideways and settled without sound. I sat at the table near the window with a second cup of coffee, staring out at the porch steps already dusted white. The trees were still, their branches heavy, the lake beyond coated in a sheet of gray ice. My phone remained off, resting face down on the windowsill. I had no urge to check it. Not yet. But by early afternoon, the weight of all the unread messages began pressing against my chest like a held breath. I turned it back on. The notifications came in like a wave. More voicemails. More texts. Not panicked now, but something softer. Quieter. Caroline, Mom had written. Your sister hasn't come downstairs in 2 days. She keeps saying your name. Then another. I know this is a lot. I know you're angry. But you've always been the strong one. You've always known how to hold things steady. Aunt May wrote too, I don't know what's happening anymore. Your mom's a wreck. Your sister's not eating. Everyone's asking where you are. Then Felicity. I made a mistake. I made a lot of mistakes. I just wanted it to be perfect. I wanted someone to finally choose me. I read each one slowly, letting their voices echo in my mind. None of them said the word. Not once. Sorry. It didn't appear in any message. They didn't want to own the past. They wanted rescue from the present. I let the phone go dark again and stood to stir the soup I'd left simmering on the stove. The cabin smelled like garlic and lentils and something earthy that reminded me of home, though not of my family. As I moved around the small kitchen, my mind drifted back to a December afternoon when I was 10. Felicity had been sick, pale and crying after slipping on the ice in our driveway. She had a scraped knee and a torn mitten. Mom swept her into her arms like a fragile package. I had stood beside them with my own skinned elbow quietly waiting. She's the little one, Caroline, Mom had said when I asked later why she didn't check on me too. She's more sensitive. That line echoed through years. Felicity needs you. She's going through something. You've always been the calm one. What they meant was this. Felicity was allowed to fall apart. I was expected to hold. Even now. Even after they cut me out. Even after they forged my name. Even after they acted like I was disposable. They still expected me to show up and glue the pieces back together. The kettle began to whistle. I poured hot water over dried chamomile and returned to my seat. Outside, the snow had thickened. The steps were no longer visible. I felt no urge to dig them out. Then my phone buzzed again. One message. Julia. Can you talk? I have news. I didn't hesitate. I called her. She answered on the first ring. Hey, she said, her voice steady but clipped. You sitting down? I'm at the cabin. Good. She didn't draw it out. I just got word. Treasury logged your submission as a formal complaint. They've opened a case file. It's official. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So they believed it. They did more than believe it. They flagged the signature anomaly, traced the vendor invoices, and already started cross-referencing Evan's financial records. They're building out the chain. What does that mean for me? It means you're protected. You acted as a fiduciary and filed in good faith. You followed protocol. You're clean. And Evan. He's in deeper than he knows. If there are shell companies involved, they'll find them. What about Felicity? Silence. Julia exhaled softly. That's harder. If she knew, if she helped move funds, she's liable. But if she didn't? I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I don't want her to go down for this. I know. We sat in silence a moment. You did the right thing, Caroline. I've handled dozens of these. Most people freeze. They rationalize, deflect, pretend they didn't see. You didn't. It doesn't feel good. It's not supposed to. It's just supposed to be true. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a while. The snow kept falling. The light in the cabin shifted to that soft gray that comes just before dusk. I wrapped myself in the thick shawl draped over the armchair and sat by the fire. The truth was moving now. Not just out in the world, but through me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. The lake had vanished under a sheet of white. By afternoon, even the trees across the shore blurred into the sky. I stood by the window, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone lukewarm, watching the world erase itself quietly. I couldn't remember the last time I felt this still. So much of my life had been motion. Crisis. Cleanup. Convenience. I was the one who drove Felicity home from that party where she drank too much and cried on the sidewalk. I was the one who picked up Mom's prescriptions when she got bronchitis and refused to admit she needed help. I filled gaps without being asked. Without being thanked. That was the role. No title, no applause. Just the expectation that I would show up every time to hold what everyone else dropped. And now that I'd stepped out of the frame, it was like someone had kicked over the entire set. Their lives didn't collapse because I left. They collapsed because I had been the thing keeping them propped up, and no one ever noticed the weight until it was gone. The snow outside thickened. I watched it pile softly on the porch railing. Somewhere beneath it, the steps I had used each morning to walk down to the water were now invisible. I didn't plan to clear them. My phone rang again just past 3. It was a number I hadn't seen in over 2 years. My father. I stared at the screen, heart slow but loud, the kind of rhythm that fills your ears before something breaks. Then I answered. "Hey, Caroline." His voice was gravelly, like someone who hadn't spoken out loud all day. Maybe longer. "Hi, Dad. I heard about the wedding." Of course he had. I waited. About Evan. The arrest. Everything. More silence. It expanded between us like a second phone line. "I didn't think it would be like this," he said finally. "I didn't think it would get this far." I kept my voice even. "You mean the money or the humiliation?" He didn't answer. "I thought you'd stop it." His voice was softer now, but the words still landed hard. "I thought you'd see it coming, that again." The assumption that my role wasn't daughter, wasn't person, but safeguard. The family's last working smoke detector. "You were always the one who noticed things," he added like it was a compliment. I was also the one who got left off the guest list. I didn't say it. Instead, I let the silence stretch. I had learned it could do more work than anger ever could. He cleared his throat. "Felicity. She's not doing great." I didn't respond. "She keeps asking for you," he said. Of course she did. Because her world had split open and no one else knew how to hold the sharp pieces. That was always my job. "She's confused," he added. "She feels betrayed." By whom? He hesitated. By Evan, obviously, but I don't know. "She's lashing out. Says everyone lied. Says no one warned her." I closed my eyes. I warned her. The first time I met Evan, I had pulled her aside the next day and told her something felt off. "He's too smooth," I said. "He talks in loops." Felicity rolled her eyes and said I was just jealous because I didn't have anyone. Then she ghosted me for 2 months. I opened my eyes again and stared out the window. The snow hadn't stopped. Dad's voice came back quieter. "Maybe we all failed her." I exhaled a small white puff against the window glass. Maybe we failed each other. That was the truth of it. He didn't apologize, but he didn't excuse anything either. That was more than I'd expected. "Take care of yourself," he said finally. Then he hung up. I stayed by the window for a long time after that, watching the storm settle into its rhythm. I imagined the house back home. The front porch with its crooked swing. The wedding decorations probably still being hauled away. My mother sitting at the kitchen table reading every headline twice. Felicity curled up in her childhood bedroom, staring at her phone, waiting for a message that wouldn't come. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because this time I wasn't going to fix the broken thing. I wasn't going to be their easy solution. I wasn't going to fold myself into someone else's apology. I had learned something in the stillness here. Something I couldn't unlearn now. I was never meant to hold everyone together. I just did it because they wouldn't. And when I stopped, they called it chaos. But it was only absence. My absence. And for once that was going to have to be enough. That morning I made my tea slower than usual. Every motion was deliberate, like I was preparing a ceremony for one. I didn't speak, didn't turn on music, didn't check the weather. The snow had quieted overnight, leaving a smooth layer across the deck, clean and untouched like fresh linen. I sat by the fire with my mug cupped in both hands, the steam rising into my face. I thought of all the times I had rushed to respond. To fix. To explain. The hours I'd spent rehearsing the right thing to say to people who had never once rehearsed anything for me. Not today. I reached into my travel bag and pulled out the envelope of stationery I had brought from home. Cream paper, heavier than printer sheets, with the kind of soft edges that made you think of weddings or sympathy notes. I had packed it on instinct without any real plan. Now I knew why. I brought the paper to the table near the window. No distractions, no phone. Just the chair, the paper, and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I uncapped my pen and wrote. No date, No greeting. No signature flourish. Just the truth. I hope you find peace. I hope you tell the truth. I hope next time the invitation comes before the apology. I didn't write anything else. I folded it once neatly, slid it into an envelope, and addressed it to the house I grew up in. No return address. Let them wonder. After lunch, I bundled up in layers and walked into the village. The path was still soft from the snowfall, boots sinking slightly into the crust of it. A few people passed by, bundled in coats, nodding with small smiles. One woman carried fresh bread in a cloth bag. Another was pulling a child on a sled. They didn't know who I was, and I didn't owe them any version of myself. At the end of the road, I came to the red metal postbox beside the corner bakery. Warm light spilled from the window, and the scent of yeast and cinnamon drifted through the door. I stood with the letter in my hand, thumb brushing the edge of the envelope. Then I dropped it in. It made a soft sound as it landed inside. Nothing dramatic, nothing final. But it was done. They'd receive it in a week, maybe less. The postmark would say Iceland, and that would be enough. On the way back, I stopped by the lagoon. The bench near the edge was still buried in snow, just enough space cleared to sit. I brushed it off with my sleeve and settled into the cold wood. My breath came out in puffs, clouding gently in front of me. The water was still dark gray under the pale sky, with a thin layer of mist trailing over the surface. I pulled out my phone. No messages this time, or maybe I just didn't check. I opened the camera, held it steady. Framed the image, a single wooden chair facing the lake, snow gathered at its legs, horizon stretched beyond it in perfect quiet. Click. That was it. No filters, no edits, no caption. I uploaded it to my Instagram story. Just the image. I knew who would see it. I didn't need to tag them. My mother still watched my stories even when she didn't call. Felicity too, even after everything. Maybe even my father, if he still used that ghost account he once denied having. They would see the chair, the stillness, the vacancy, and they would know. They would know it wasn't absence. It was choice. That I was here. Watching. Not because I wanted attention or revenge, but because I wanted them to understand what it looked like when someone removed themselves, not out of pain but out of clarity. They had planned a wedding and forgot to leave me a seat. So I built my own view. I stayed on the bench until the wind picked up. My cheeks flushed red and I could no longer feel my fingers. The cold wasn't cruel, it was honest. Like everything else here, back at the cabin, I peeled off layers and fed the fireplace 2 more logs. The flames crackled slowly, casting soft orange shapes on the walls. I lit the brass candle on the counter. The one the old woman in town had given me as a welcome gift. I hadn't touched it until now. Then I pulled a fresh page from my journal and wrote not a letter but a list. Things I no longer have to do. Pretend I'm okay. Answer out of obligation. Translate silence into love. Hold what others drop. Apologize for being the one who notices. I paused, then added one more line. Wait for someone to choose me. The last light of day stretched across the floorboards like silk. I curled under a blanket with a bowl of warm soup and let the silence return, not as something heavy but as something earned. That night I didn't check my phone. Not once. The light through the curtains was gray and weightless, the kind that didn't bother announcing itself. I stayed in bed longer than usual, letting the warmth of the quilt wrap around me like a decision I didn't need to justify. Outside, the lake was a perfect sheet of silver, unmoving and unbothered. I watched it through the cracked curtain, letting the silence rise in me until it felt like breath. Eventually, I moved, not because I had to, but because I was ready. I brewed a pot of coffee, letting it steep longer than usual. I poured it into the ceramic mug I'd bought from the bakery 2 days earlier, the one with the tiny chip at the rim. It felt honest in my hand. Nothing was perfect here. That was part of the draw. I opened my laptop and pulled up the news. It took 3 seconds to find her name. Felicity Albright St. James takes leave of absence from Halstead Interiors amid personal and legal complications. Legal complications. A phrase wrapped in soft cloth to keep the glass from shattering. They didn't name the trust, or the dollar amount. Or the video of the bouquet flying across the reception hall. They said nothing about the missing invitations or the sister across the ocean with the files in her hand. But I could see the outline of the truth behind every softened word. I kept scrolling. Another article featured a photo of my mother snapped from the edge of our neighbor's hedges. Her figure was half blocked by the glass panel of the storm door hand midair, like she'd been caught turning away. The caption read, "No comment from family at this time." There was speculation about the investigation into Evan St. James. Questions about funds, whispered timelines. My father, through his law firm, issued a single line: "Mr. Albright is conducting an internal review of the matter." I knew what that meant. I closed the laptop, folded it shut like I was sealing something in. I didn't want to read any more of the story they were trying to stitch together from the ashes. I wanted air. I pulled on my boots, coat, scarf, gloves, rituals now not chores. I stepped outside and was met with that soft quiet only snow can bring. It muffled every sound, even my breath. The path to the lake was familiar under my feet, my boots leaving new prints next to the ones I had left yesterday. The wind was low, moving gently between the trees like something remembering how to dance. I walked slowly, letting my fingers graze the bark of the trees as I passed like I was greeting old friends. At the edge of the lake, I paused. The world was still. Even the birds had gone quiet. I bent down and picked up 3 stones, cold and flat. I turned them in my palm. One smooth, one chipped, one almost heart-shaped. I slipped them into my coat pocket, not because they meant anything yet. But maybe they would. On my way back, I heard a snowplow in the distance. The only sound for miles. Life outside the quiet kept moving. Back at the cabin, I took off my boots, hung my coat by the stove, and made a pot of lentil soup. While it simmered, I arranged the stones in a row on the windowsill above the sink. I didn't give them names or reasons. They were just there. Like me. The fire burned steady as I sat down with my bowl. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. A single vibration. No ring. I turned it over. It was a message from Rachel. "If you'd been there, maybe you would have stopped me. But thank you, Caroline, for not stopping me." I stared at the words for a long time. She was the only one who had said anything real. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to explain, she just told the truth. And she was right. If I'd been there, I might have pulled her aside. Whispered something rational, talked her down, tried to salvage the moment. And in doing so, I would have buried everything we had all been trying not to name. But I wasn't there. And the truth came up like a flood. I didn't respond. I just pressed the side button, watched the screen go dark, and leaned back in the chair. The candle on the shelf flickered once, then stilled. That afternoon, I went for another walk, this time past the bend in the trail where the trees opened into a clearing. I stood there a while, letting the wind press into my coat, face turned to the wide gray sky. Peace didn't feel loud. It didn't feel earned either. It felt chosen. Reached for, kept in both hands. And for once, I wasn't afraid it would vanish if I looked away. I walked home slower than usual. Let the cold linger on my cheeks. Back inside, I sat by the fire and watched the flames lean and curl. I didn't post anything that day. I didn't need to. I watched the snow melt slowly over the next 2 weeks. It didn't disappear all at once, just pulled back inch by inch like a tide, revealing patches of brown earth and damp moss beneath. The lake, once still and opaque, began to ripple again in the afternoons. Some mornings, mist curled along the waterline like breath hanging onto winter for just a little longer. I stayed in the cabin. No one called anymore. The text stopped after that last weekend, the one after Rachel's message. Even Julia, who usually sent check-ins disguised as memes, had gone quiet, sensing I needed something deeper than distraction. I answered a few emails from work. Shifted my schedule. Set up a remote routine that didn't require me to explain where I was or why. I worked in the mornings, walked in the afternoons, cooked small meals at night. I lit candles. I kept a journal. I didn't rush. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night, not from a nightmare, but from stillness. I would sit at the kitchen table in the dark, cup, warm tea in my hands, and just be there. Fully. Unapologetically. not waiting for the next disaster to catch me unprepared. One morning, near the end of February, I checked the voicemail app I had forgotten about. There was just one new message. From my mother. Her voice was slower than usual. Less polished. There was no script in it. "Caroline," she said. "I know you don't owe me anything. I know you might never come back. I guess I want you to know I still hope I get to see you again. Even if it's not at a dinner table. Even if it's not in a photo. Just once." There was a pause, then a breath. Then the click of the line disconnecting. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just stood in the doorway of the cabin for a long time, letting the sun warm one side of my face while the other remained in shadow. They weren't monsters. They were just people who had leaned too long on the one person who never said no. And now that she had said it, the silence was deafening. But not to me. I wrote her a letter. I didn't send it. I wrote it anyway. Then I folded it into a square and tucked it into the back of my journal. Some things didn't need to be delivered to matter. I stayed in Iceland until the snow was nearly gone. Until the trails turned soft with mud and the village bakery put fresh tulips in the window. I learned the names of the women at the counter. I lent a jacket to a tourist who had underestimated the wind. I drank cardamom coffee in a clay cup and finished the last page of the novel I'd been carrying for 6 years. One day I realized I had not thought about Felicity for a full 24 hours. Not her tears, not her wedding, not her silence. She had become like the wind, something I used to brace against but now just passed through me. The same was true of my father. And even my mother. The shift wasn't loud, it just arrived like spring. I began looking at flights. Not because I wanted to go home, but because I knew I didn't need to stay hidden to remain whole. I could go anywhere now, as someone who had stopped explaining herself to people who only listened when the house was on fire. One evening I posted a photo. It was just the lake. No bench this time. No chipped mug. No signs of life. Just water. Moving. In the dark I could feel my own breath again, not rushed or suppressed or edited. Just present. I didn't check who viewed the photo. That was never the point. I wasn't reaching anymore. I wasn't asking to be understood. I had made a life here in the quiet, and for once I wasn't afraid of what they might think of it. I had chosen peace. Not because it was noble, but because I could. If you've ever been the one who held the room together, the one they counted on until it was easier to leave you out, I see you. If you've ever gone quiet because saying something never changed anything or stayed strong while waiting for someone to notice you were tired, this story is for you. You don't have to disappear to be free. But if you did for a while, I understand that too. Caroline could be someone like you. And if you felt something in her silence, I'd love to hear what it meant to you. Tell me in the comments below. This is a place you don't have to explain yourself. Not anymore.